Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today I've been learning about agents, and AI agents in particular, which those of you who think you just barely got a grasp on ChatGPT and how large language models work, well, 2025 is going to be the year of the agent, which is a large language model, plus some tools, plus something called an orchestrator, in order to, go back and forth between the tools and iterate things. So, yeah, tip of the iceberg. The model, the large language model, is just the tip of the iceberg. Now we're going to have the bots doing stuff for us, hopefully this year. Anyway, there's a good Google white paper out there if you're interested in such things. But I bumped into this one, and this is cutting edge and also applicable to academia, as opposed to some of the more technical stuff. So I said, let's read this together. It looks like it's long, but it's not as long as it looks because it's all in, not split columns or anything, and also because there's some diagrams and some references. Anyway, I spent a minute introducing this, and it's probably a minute wasted. Interactionalism, redesigning higher learning for the large language agent era. So, let's see what we can wrap our minds around. We introduce interactionalism as a new set of guiding principles and heuristics for the design and architecture of learning now available due to generative AI platforms. Specifically, we articulate interactional intelligence as a net new skill set that is increasingly important when core cognitive tasks are automatable and augmentable by Gen AI functions. We break down these skills into core sets of metacognitive and meta-emotional components and show how working with large language model-based agents can be proactively used to help develop learners. Interactionalism is not as advanced as a theory of learning, but as a blueprint for the practice of learning in coordination with Gen AI. This approach is focused on explicit pedagogical moves, gestures, and maneuvers that focus on the dialogical and dynamics of learning together with Gen AI agents. The value of this approach is an anticipation of growing reliance on and integration with AI as co-agent with humans and an important factor in the production of skills and knowledge across many domains. So this should be interesting. How do we work with the robots instead of doing what I advise, which is resisting them? Because, we want to automate everything, right? Right? We don't need real humans anymore. We introduce interactionalism as a framework and a set of guiding principles for learning in the generative AI era. Gen AI, and in particular dialogical agents, DAs, based on large language models, LLM, enable and facilitate learning that is personalized, socialized, and conversational in nature, in sharp contrast to linear standardized approaches, largely extant in higher education, that are based on monological approaches to content presentation and skill assessment and one-to-many approaches to knowledge dissemination, aka lecturing. This new learning regime matches and tracks ways in which the nature of human work, tasks, skills, and roles has shifted over the past 2 decades towards greater levels of interactivity and collaboration. And yeah, I can kind of understand wanting to do this, but then I end up back with the other headline I just saw, which was kids these days 40% of them can't read, and everyone's talking about the thing I floated at NASIG a couple of years ago, where I'm who says we're going to have text or graphical user interfaces in 5 to 10 years, which makes me worry because the bots will be smart, but we'll all be dumb. It'd be great. All right, an interactionalist approach to learning closely matches the landscape of human labor markets. In this new regime, know-how remains privileged relative to know-what, as in information being one click away, as it has been for the past 2 decades, but learning together with AI and learning to think and act together with AI, with other learners in ways moderated and facilitated by AI agents are net new capabilities and corresponding skills we can aim to have learners develop by processes that themselves become models of the desired skills. Circular reasoning, okay. We articulate interactional intelligence as a new skill set, break it down to core components, establish links to metacognitive and meta-emotional skills, and show how large language model-based agents, LLAs, acting as dialogical, okay, we can tell my brain's spinning on this, acting as dialogical agents across learning scenarios, can be used to help learners develop it. We suggest ways in which schools and universities can implement architectural redesigns of their entire set of learning activities using Gen AI technologies that exist today to embody the interactionalist approach to learning. A key component of an interactionalist approach to learning is a recognition and sharp definition of dialogical agents that capture with fidelity and nuance the conversational and interactional structures of teaching and learning that constitute the fabric of learning. The design and patterning of such agents, as well as their use, both relies on interactional intelligence and helps humans develop key components of it, most of which are metacognitive and meta-emotional in nature. In contradistinction to approaches that aim to lower the metacognitive load that interacting with large language models and designing large language agents creates, we focus on the opportunity to use the new dialogical and interactionalist landscape of learning as a way of helping learners develop and expand their meta-human skill set. There is growing interest in human-computer interaction that focuses not only on the interplay and coordination of the cognitive outputs that intersect between humans and machines, but actually makes understanding machine behavior a primary intent. The evolution of how machines think and operate are foundational to interactionalism, as this determines the type of engagement, i.e. pedagogical maneuvers, that AI can engage in. We address these specific approaches below through the lens of Gen AI's ability to create novel outputs in real time, a significant new affordance not evident in today's textbook and lecture-based learning models. And for those of you who don't know what affordance is like a feature or a component that's designed to help you facilitate an action. So those of us who sat around in classical design theory class, you get to learn a lot about affordances like handles and things that don't turn when they should be pushed, and push versus pull, and all sorts of exciting things. Anyway, read The Design of Everyday Things, kids. It is a great book. All right, so the challenge Gen AI poses to traditional models of education is clear. At a time when learners can use Gen AI tools to replicate good enough answers to questions, assignments, and quizzes that form the canon of learning assessment, which are only weakly, if at all, identifiable as having been AI generated, the integrity of individual skill assessment is imperiled, thereby thus signaling value of certifications of learning and skill bestowed upon learners that have access to such tools and are evaluated by standard model education is reduced. And therefore the labor market value of the experiences that compromise an educational system is also diminished, and we have no jobs. The Gen AI challenge to assessment integrity is real in the context of standard models of education. Yeah, this is an interesting time to be in academia, because I wanted to stay in the ivory tower because I thought it was safe, but it is still not safe, and I'm kind of glad. As someone who grew up working class, I'd like to see the establishment be sort of shattered. Let the knowledge be free. Let the knowledge be free. All right, so independently of the assessment integrity crisis that Gen AI induces, there is a challenge in patterning the interactions between Gen AI and humans that occur in the learning process that enhance and promote learner agency, engagement, and curiosity. A common early adoption has been to have Gen AI serve as a tutor that guides and directs learners. This application is critical, but requires the development of broader framing around topics of dialogic grammar that provides structure as to how Gen AI directs learners through questioning, answer provisioning, and nudging towards deeper thinking. Some of these studies of the uses of Gen AI in education show that learners tend to rely on AI for learning, but don't learn from it. There is ample room for both experimentation, improvement in the patterning of dialogical use cases, and a grammar of learning-oriented dialogue, or a dialogical grammar, that promotes and enhances learning. Understanding both the challenges and opportunities Gen AI presents can be advanced by unpacking the key assumptions and commitments that standard models of education share. Okay, so this is the traditional method. To skill or competence as being individual in nature in the sense that they are exercised, embodied, and learned individually, assessed on an individual one-shot basis, one question, one answer, and designed to be deployed on an individual basis. Yes, because up until now, the individual is pretty much the most atomic unit of society. To know how, being associated with the completion of an individual task at a certain level of quality, accuracy, validity, coherence, verifiability, and reliability in a certain preset period of time. Okay, I could kind of see that, yeah. You have to be able to do the thing within a certain amount of time, yep, with his tests. To an incontrovertible base of know-what, comprising facts, rules, associations, laws, norms that undergird the individual performance of tasks comprising the learner's know-how. And to some extent, we've already kind of gotten away from this as we move towards Web 2.0, because a lot of us in academia are like, well, you just need to know how to look it up and where to look it up, and I don't know, as we move further towards embracing like automatic answers and general use of AI, like, you need to know, like, whether or not the machine is messing with you. And yes, the machines are getting better and better, can check themselves, but it's still important to know, like, your multiplication tables to see if it's giving you decent algebra results for a math example. All right, these commitments together make current educational models vulnerable to assessment integrity challenges from learners equipped with access to Gen AI tools, which by design are competent at reproducing probably, approximately correct, or normative answers to canonical questions. However, these commitments are also precisely the ones we now need to revisit and revise for reasons related to the ways human work has come to be organized during the past 30 years. Just going to take a little sip here. Skill and competence are largely exercised interactively and dialogically. Through assertions, questions, queries, challenges, answers, and responses that are directed, directive, and embedded in a context with a pretext and a context, and for a dialogical and conversational purpose. The tasks that are yardsticks for competence are themselves interactive and dialogical in nature, rather than carried out by oneself in a way that is uninterrupted by interjections, questions, challenges, and adaptive iterative reframings. They often entail or require dialogue in synchronous or asynchronous form, and their criteria for successful closure are dialogical, such as agreement, clarity on areas of disagreement, rather than monological, optimality, consistency, etc. in nature. So yeah, nowadays we do more collaborative, and we have to go back and forth, and nobody is a great, inventor by themselves anymore. The base of know-how, The base of know-what that grounds the exercise of competent know-how is almost never beyond doubt or incontrovertible. Rather, is subject to interactive and collective processes, often with peers in framing, articulation, inference, and deliberation that are social and interpersonal in nature. Facts are footnoted by epistemological metadata no one who wants to count on them can ignore because they qualify validity, accuracy, and reliability, and which can only be brought into relief by queries, questions, and challenges. The Gen AI challenge to the assessment integrity of current models is a timely signal of structural change that is overdue. The change is one that takes us to dialogical learning, a model of learning that's interactive, conversational, and nonlinear by distinction from standard monological and linear practices. In the standard model, the course is a linear object, a set of reading or viewing materials like lectures and readings, a set of assignments and quizzes in order to succeed each one of the intake episodes, and an assessment instrument, exam, or a test that tests for a combination of know-how and know-what the learner is to have acquired. Feedback is scant, generic, and delayed relative to learners' performances. By contrast, the dialogical model lays out the set of core competencies or skills the learner needs to demonstrate to have passed the course, and allows the learner the agency to engage directly with a dialogical agent that functions as a tutor, teaching assistant, evaluator, guide, and mentor. The learner is co-responsible with the dialogical agent for the structuration of the material of the course and for the specific in-moment choices. Read further, do a quiz, do an assignment, have an open-ended discussion. Structuration, I feel like that's not a word. I'm sorry, my English grammar I hate it when people verb the nouns. Although this structuration, I think that's like an adjective. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm getting too stuck on words I don't think are words again. Our modern language. All right. Some 40 years ago, Benjamin Bloom showed that one-on-one tutoring of students leads to a 2 sigma effect, and that students that learn through dialogical learning outperform 98% of their peers that learn through standard methods. The challenge has always been that one-on-one attention to the learner is too expensive in time and resources. Gen AI allows us to address the learner intimacy challenge head-on and design the always-on tutor that walks the learner step by step through the process of skill acquisition. Such a learning process mirrors in its structure and function changes in human work organizations as the task for which the learners need to be prepared is rapidly changing, as well as a result of the use of Gen AI in the workplace. The base of skills most sought after by organizations that recruit and employ graduates has shifted towards the skills required to design and take part in interactions, and those skills that are predominantly communicative and dialogical in nature. We have for some time been moving from an era of skills that are individually learned and exercised to an era in which they are interactionally and dialogically exercised, and whose acquisition will greatly benefit from being interactionally and dialogically learned as well. Gen AI, and particularly the dialogical learning and interaction afforded by LLMs, present an opportunity to redesign and re-engineer the fabric of learning activities so that they match the new base of skills and competencies learners even now are desired and soon required to have developed. The transition to the more active and engaged learning calls into question more than just assessment integrity. Our collective language referring to the elements of a learning experience still carries with it the ontology of the classical university experience, courses, lectures, readings. With a set of dialogical agents being the primary integrator of learners, instructors, and content, many incumbent elements of traditional learning need to be discarded or transformed as we focus capability of an individual learner to engage with Gen AI in ways that enable and facilitate her learning of Gen AI relevant skills needed in the workplace. Interactional intelligence. So relevant prior work has recognized the relevance and importance of artificial cognition and of its working alongside human cognition in difficult task and knowledge domains, and called for interfacial research that sets out to track comparative advantage of one form of cognition has over another in various predicaments. Cognitive approaches to skill development have relied heavily on the mind as a computational device that mimics an allocation of memory, computation, input-output functions, a digital computer. In the cognitivist tradition, working with computers entails no more than drawing the right boundaries between human and artificial cognition, in ways that heed the comparative advantages of humans and machines in various tasks. Just as the calculator made it possible for humans to offload large calculations, the word processor enabled the augmentation of a person's working memory, just so the highly flexible self-refining algorithms enabled by deep learning enabled humans to offload tasks such as statistical inference and data classification, and to move to a lot of the processing that previously happened offline to an offline, always-on, connected, and fluid environment. And those of you like me who got a nice certificate in business data visualization, yeah, that's probably already gone out the window. Individual cognitive skills remain privileged in educational systems over the interactional and communicative skills that have been steadily growing in value. The capacity of Gen AI technologies, in particular the large language models such as GPT-4, Claude 3, Llama, and Gemini, to mimic dialogical and conversational interactions that are attuned to conversational implicature in a speaker role, as well as to the purpose and substance of each act of speaking and writing, is a quantitative advance that enables a qualitative change in what is possible and desirable in a learning environment. Okay, so things are changing and we need to change too. That is because much of the cognitive work that humans used to have to do to be able to interact productively with machines now becomes interactive and metacognitive work. The Gen AI-enabled worker works alongside artificially sapient. Okay, I need to look up sapient. I'm sorry. Stuck in a word again. To dialogically co-create artifacts, to design cognitive tasks and task architectures, as well as test and testbed for the output of machines for which a human will need at the end of the workday to take human responsibility. The cognitive dimension of knowledge work needs to be urgently augmented by the epistemological dimension. How do we know what counts as knowing, what counts as valid, what's a justification, a clarification, a model, an inference? And an ontological dimension, what is real? How do words pick out objects and events that count as reliable references? Which inform the questions that will orient the redesign of work. What is human agency? What part of it can be assigned to machines? What is machine agency? Thinking with artificially or naturally sapient agents, the essence of interactionalism comprises an emergent set of skills that are already highly valuable in the labor market. In a Gen AI-enabled organizational environment, learners already need to reason, infer, optimize, create, and inquire together with other people and with machines. The soft skills revolution, wherein the labor market value of social and relational skills has outgrown that of cognitive and technical skills, has been with us for at least 2 decades, and the importance of interactional and integrative skills has been with us for quite some time. In an organizational life world in which more than 80% of human work is carried out in groups and teams, it seems intuitive that interacting with knowledge, machines, and other humans constitutes an important and prevalent way of being. But it is less evident, though no less true and relevant, that this way of being can be more or less skilled. The tasks and skills associated with interactions can be understood, quantified, measured, and developed in ways similar to those in which we have helped learners develop individual cognitive, technical, and algorithmic skills. Doing so requires we conceptualize a new kind of intelligence that is interactive, interpretive, and dialogical, rather than individualistic and monological in nature. And some of us may deny this because we are old and cranky. All right. Reading materials, a quintessentially individual activity now carried out as a dialogue between the reader and the dialogical agent capable of summarizing, extracting, paraphrasing the source material, which is a life skill anyway, which includes audio, video, and text files, and thus requires a dialogical adaptive inquiry skills as opposed to the more or less passive processing of semantic and syntactic information. Analysis, which includes parsing, classifying, optimizing, making inferences that reach beyond a body of information given, now becomes a process by which pattern queries, questions, and challenges can guide a large language model agent to make sequential, recursively refinable inferences that are themselves guided by previous interactions in the same dialogue. Writing, perhaps the most prevalently individual task, to which one devotes a significant amount of thinking pre-work, now emerges as an interactive process of prompting, outlining, developing, elaborating, editing, culling, curating, and shaping in collaboration with an AI agent that acts as thinking, writing, word, and editing partner. And that, I'll admit, is helpful. Coding, traditionally an individual sport, has already become a team sport via paired or collective programming and via coding co-pilot assistants that offer personalized, contextualized guidance on almost every task in the software development workflow, ranging from algorithm design to data structuration to syntactical assistance and debugging. The scenarios and use cases in which writing, coding, analysis, reading, and most of the individualistically exercised skills people possess show up in the workplace are so different from the ways in which they've typically been learned and for the most part still taught that by referring to them by their accepted names can lead to confusion. For instance, writing reliably evokes imagery of an individual sitting in front of a screen or an open notebook. These traditionally foundational skills should rather be augmented or replaced by their interactively exercised counterparts. So reading, interactive processing of text. Conversational agents can be prompted and contextualized, produce targeted summaries of reports, videos, and audio files to process their text in ways that return responses to targeted questions and queries. To synthesize implications of the assumptions, inferences, and arguments of a piece of text to another body of textual knowledge. Writing becomes interactive creation and production of text. Conversational agents can be patterned to create outlines and summaries that adequately respond to context, refine and develop arguments, to address counter-arguments, to raise questions and challenges that would naturally occur to members of the target audience, to expand arguments via examples, counter-examples, and alternative narratives, and to deconstruct arguments to core assumptions and the inferences that emanate from them and reconstruct them from alternative foundations. Analysis becomes interactive production of plausible inferences. Interactive dialogical agents can be prompted and contextualized to shape and filter data, to suggest methods for extracting patterns from it, to implement algorithms that process data so as to do so, to refine and augment the space of plausible inferences, and to engage in an inductive, deductive, and abductive inferences about the implications of the inferences to a predicament or situation. Coding, interactive production of machine executable code. Interactive co-pilots can be blueprinted to synthesize algorithms that solve a specific problem or to formulate the problem in ways that admit of algorithmic solutions, to produce a sample proof of concept code that implements an algorithm, to provide feedback on code already built, to generate code on the basis of pseudo-algorithmic specifications of tasks and data structures, to generate test vectors for pseudo-algorithms and existing code bases, and to integrate and coordinate different algorithms at the level of their interfaces and data utilization. In each case, tasks that were previously exercised individually in isolation, like reading a report, making notes, producing a summary that specifies key assertions, arguments, and grounds of the document, are now exercised in dialogue and in interaction with machines. Prompt the LLM to produce a summary focused on, ask it to answer a series of questions on the report for the purpose of, da-da-da-da-da-da. I'm going to skip the rest of that. I would argue, though, like, for example... we have really long release notes for one of our software vendors, and yeah, I could ask it, like, what do you need to summarize? But as I pointed out when I do the summaries, it doesn't necessarily know, because it's not hooked into a bunch of other systems, like how exactly our system is configured. So I could read it, and it could spit me out some great summaries, but it might not be for features we can actually do anything with. So, all right, I didn't want to keep reading this. All right. Acts of learning or engagement in knowledge generation, validation, or extension processes have critical epistemological and ontological dimensions and consequences that highlight the links between core skills to metacognitive skills. Not surprisingly, the base of skills and activities that enable and comprise the interactive consumption and production of text, including text embodied in audio and video signals, are different enough from their individually exercised counterparts, so we have good reason to want to identify, measure, and develop these skills independently and to redesign current learning practices to help us do just that. And as it turns out, even in the case of individualistic tasks that have become heavily socialized during the past 2 decades, like coding, programming, becoming interactive compilation, and paired programming, the use of LLAs as the intelligent other induces a need for a set of skills that only overlap those required when interacting with human collaborators, but extend beyond them. Key to such a redesign is the realization that the basic palette of operations, operators, and tasks whose competent performance is the hallmark of the skilled individual was to draw upon more individualistic eras and times, such as registering or calling on cues, summarizing extractively or abstractively, making deductive, inductive, or abductive inferences on the basis of textual or symbolic structures, then code models, narratives, and other knowledge structures are now being augmented and sometimes replaced by a new set of interactive tasks and operations. The individualistic tasks associated with the intentional and sophisticated consumption and production of text, reading and writing, both natural and artificial languages, in written and spoken modalities, are now replaced and augmented by tasks that have to do with the production of communicative acts in context for a purpose with a pretext and subtext. So here's an example if that all went over your head just like mine. So, reading an essay about a subject becomes not only parsing the semantics and syntax of the text with a view to recovering the substance, relevance, novelty, and implications of applications to the text to a predicament, situation, or topic, but also articulate a set of queries and questions that one hopes to have answers as a result for having read X for a purpose and duly contextualizing and prompting a Gen AI agent to parse the text through the prism of these questions, or indeed to formulate specific questions, queries, and challenges on the basis of generic patterns of successful inquiry. So this I can kind of see, like, this would be super, like, one of the things that's irking me at work right now is every time I open an Adobe file, it's like, do you want to use the Gen AI tool to summarize it? And I'm like, I'm not allowed to. I wish I could. And I wish there was a button where I could just hide this permanently and not have to keep seeing it, because it cheeses me off. So yeah, being able to interrogate, like, where exactly and how to get help and stuff from, like, help manuals would be amazing. But then you also have... So, for example, if I do research on a generic topic and I don't know exactly what question I have in my head, like, I don't know how useful it's going to be. I feel like sometimes you have to have a body of work presented to you over time for you to finally make connections. I don't know. Maybe we're just really dumb monkeys, but I can see that being helpful in one way, but not necessarily in another. So, writing a report about a subject is not only putting together a series of communicative acts and utterances, such as articulating and expressing a set of claims and positions that are warrantedly... Okay, again, I think that's not English. assertable, I'm not quite sure if that's English either, to a person of a certain disposition and background, with certain interests and affordances for the purpose of informing, persuading, explaining a fact, principle, model, method, or other generality to someone who has particular standards for determining whether or not and how an explanandum explains an explanans. Okay, so I feel like this is explanation, explains the thing to be explained, maybe? Oh my gosh. This is the joy of, like, why I didn't get into linguistics. Signs and symbols and semantics are all fun. Justifying a maxim or an action or a decision to someone who has specific predispositions, commitments, but also clarifying references and consequences of assertions and answer to queries and questions produced in real time by a Gen AI agent and prompting the agent to raise such questions, answering questions about validity, informativeness, and relevance and the intent of the writer or speaker in making assertions, responding to challenges raised to the assertive force of an expression, the validity, completeness, and relevance of a statement, the coherence and consistency of an argument. The monological and individualistic processes of writing-reading are replaced by dialogical processes of reading alongside and writing with. Accordingly, the repertoire of communicative acts that need to be mastered range beyond asserting, explaining, justifying, or in some way advocating, include interrogative skills, querying, questioning, verifying, challenging, and responsive skills, answering, responding in informative and relevant ways. Taken as a whole, these pedagogical moves, maneuvers, and gestures, yeah, I think that's a typo, escalate the cognitive involvement of humans to a metacognitive level. In the examples above, routine, mundane, individual learning activities are managed through AI, and more complex and involved tasks are initiated by humans through more thoughtful prompting and assessment. To those familiar with a certain tradition of thinking about language and cognition, the interactional turn in the definition and cultivation of intelligence will not be as surprising as to others. In this tradition, thinking is a form of internal conversation, which in turn is an internalized version of the sorts of dialogical exchanges a person has. Because reasoning is dialogical and dialectical in nature, measuring one's skill and prowess therein needs to account for the communicative, justificatory, explanatory, clarificatory, functions that reason plays in society. Many of the enigmas in reason, including non sequiturs and incorrigible fallacies, unwarranted biases, and apparently suboptimal heuristics, appear as reasonable ecological adaptations of communicative practices to interactional predicaments, such as having to persuade or convince someone of the validity of a claim, or having to figure out if one's interlocutor is telling the truth. These practices are far more textured and subtle than the fast and frugal heuristics that have been proposed to explain the purely cognitive engagement of human minds with large information sets under time pressure and resource constraints. They are at least as sophisticated and universal as the deep learning networks that a universal function approximate towards, as they need to adapt not only to models, data, objective functions, but also to the interpersonal, social, cultural, physical, and physiological context of the communication based on models and the data. The interactionalist term we propose here has deep roots, but to date it has not been fully articulated and developed into a set of models, methods, and blueprints for seeing, measuring, developing skills, and for the design and development of learner experiences. Tests of intelligence, cognitive, and algorithmic skill and computational prowess remain focused on the efforts of individual in isolation. While non-cognitive measures of individual skill have been advanced in the psychometric and econometric literatures, the task or self-reported traits that they are based on remain individualistic in nature, such as in the case of personality traits, reliable disposition to interact in certain ways across a range of different situations. By contrast, the interactionalist approach to human skill specification, learning design, is significantly under-theorized and underdeveloped. We do not have good interactional and dialogical skill ontologies, let alone measures what we can reliably gauge a learner progress against. Developing such an ontology and associated measures and means for developing these skills present a significant opportunity to advance both human skill classification and human upskilling practices to the stage they need to arrive at in an era in which co-sapience becomes widespread. Alright, so how do we do this? Suppose you want to learn how to play tennis as quickly as proficiently as possible. There are lots of tennis training programs and academies, and all of them are based on the same philosophy of tennis learning. You have to become a good short, medium, and long distance runner first, and then you have to specifically learn how to jump forward, backwards, sideways. Then you have to go through a set of weight training classes to develop your anterior deltoids and biceps of the arm. Then you have a master walking a balance beam. Then you get to swing a racket while looking at yourself in the mirror, and you will graduate after you keep up a rally against a fixed wall at least 100 times in a row without a glitch. Once you graduate, you get to play against real people, wielding rackets, trying to win points from you by doing all people do when they try for real to win. Thus is not a far-fetched model the current divergence between what most of higher education models teach and help learners learn on one hand, and the sorts of tasks winners are expected to be able to perform competently by recruiters and employers after they graduate. Yeah, that's a pretty good analogy of what life was like post information school graduation. Yeah. Interactionalism posits matters need not be this way, and indeed they cannot remain this way if higher learning is to deliver on its educational upskilling mission and its social contract to provide a vehicle for socioeconomic mobility through the acquisition of valuable skills. Rather, it envisions a redesign of the experience of all learners so that the method of learning embodies a desired learning outcome. Instead of requiring learners to submit to schedules of information consumption, a can of tests and assignments that test competent exercise of individually exercised skills, perform tasks such as recall and interpretation of information, modeling of phenomena, and inferences of patterns and regularities from the data sets these phenomena have generated, the articulation of plausible arguments about, and exegeses and critiques and textual forms of information, the calculation of solutions of well-specified problems using deductive, inductive, abductive patterns of inference, the interactionalist program makes the learning method itself a model for new interactional skill set learners will require. The learning experience embodies the new learning objectives. It shifts the emphasis of learning from an individual production of artifacts to an interactive production of artifacts. 2 sentences ago, I do not want to ever hear anything again about how long my sentences run on. Those of you that know me in my personal life. That was a long one. Crucially, interactionalism also shifts the basis for evaluation from the competent production of an artifact, essay, paragraph, piece of code, algorithm, yada, 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 to a pattern of interaction with an appropriately patterned dialogical agent aimed at co-producing an artifact. For instance, from individual calculation to interactive computation, replace or augment the step-by-step record of the calculation, and the final result is the basis of evaluation by a transcript of the interaction with the dialogical agent aimed at producing the fastest way of producing a reliable computational procedure for solving a problem or providing the proof of a conjecture or theorem, the embodied aim of algorithmic analysis and optimization. You're about to do what you think you should be doing. Okay. From individual modeling to interactive model construction, elaboration, and testing. Replace the articulation of a model of a trend, fact-based, or phenomena as the basis of evaluation by a transcript of a record of the interaction with the dialogical agent aimed at producing a model for optimizing, predicting, or explaining a set of data, which heeds a set of logical, material, or computational constraints and includes the formulation of queries, questions, challenges, prompts, and the interactive specification of the critical tests of validity and reliability of the model. From individual argument production to dialogical argument construction refinement. Lawyers are going to have a fun time with these bots, I can see it now. Replace the syllogic forms of valid and sound arguments for explaining, justifying, or deconstructing particular general statements as the basis for evaluation with a transcript of the interaction with a learning agent aimed at dialogic construction of an argument that satisfies a set of conditions such as intelligibility, coherence, or logical consistency with other assertions or arguments in which it's robust to various challenges to its grounds and inferential links. From individual exegesis to interactive interpretation. Replace the individually produced essay or paragraph that lays out plausible, warranted interpretations of a piece of text vis-a-vis a set of pre-existing substantive epistemological or ontological commitments and a set of intentions of the writer with a transcript of an interaction with a dialogical agent aimed at reconstructing plausible interpretations and adducing evidence for the validity from the target text, refining the interpretations in view of evidence from the target text or other texts, and integrating across different plausible interpretations. From individual to interactive verification. Replace the individually produced report, the verification, the validity, soundness, completeness, reliability, generalizability of a piece of text with a transcript of an interaction with a dialogical agent that aims to produce a verification protocol, set of queries, questions, challenges, putative answers, whose outputs will provide sound reasons for acting upon the basis of the predictions and results of a piece of text. Alright, so metacognitive and meta-emotional demands. So interactionalism matches the phase change in the nature, exercise, and deployment of human skills that Gen AI enables in the workplace, in part by augmenting the dimensionality of knowledge work to include a metacognitive and meta-emotional dimension. Prompting, patterning, and connecting LLAs, designing tests for these agents that sample across the possible worlds in which are instantiated, and architecting collections of agents that perform a specific workflow, which includes the task of interacting with other people and machines, requires a form of thinking that is different in kind from that required to interact with machines whose task execution is deterministic and the range of inputs is restricted to formal scripts written in a preset syntax. Yes, I agree with this. It's going to be a lot harder to interpret what the machine starts spitting out. Anyway, when we engage in such tasks, we are monitoring, designing, patterning, and offloading cognitive work in a complex, non-stationary environment. Our ability to estimate the relative strengths and weaknesses of human and AI agents at performing certain tasks, monitor the degree to which the AI output on a per-task basis is useful, valid, attuned, responsive, informative, etc., and differentially energize the specific cognitive functions while minimizing task switching costs is very important to the quality of both the process and the product of the man-machine interaction. Yeah, you definitely don't want to confuse the human. Metacognitive activities refer to action sequences aimed at monitoring and controlling one's own mental states and events, thoughts, and perceptions. Metacognitive skills are specific combinations of general abilities to register, monitor, and purposefully control one's own mental events in ways that are useful and adaptive to the environment and to the problem or predicament. So these include task planning, prospecting, partitioning, and sequential energization, task switching, attention steering, monitoring of one's mental events, and sensory stimuli, and the suppression of impulses to subordinate them to the pursuit of a coherent purpose. So self-explications, specifying your objective, and that's monitoring, registering, control, specifying how one frames the problem, monitoring, control, breaking it down, monitoring, control, allocating energy to sequential tasks, monitoring, control, evaluating, registering, monitoring, control. So we can see a lot of this is all in registering and monitoring and control. So yeah, task switching, partial credit, objective refinement, task specification. So this decomposition of metacognitive skills allows us to directly connect them to the specific skills and interactionist approach with learning development. The prototypical and modal ways in which people interact with LLMs require a dense and proactive exercise of metacognitive functions. Consider, for instance, designing a prompt, which requires iterative switching between mapping out the likely response characteristic of an LLM to the prompt's language, the design of the language of the prompt itself. Refining a prompt, which requires rapid switching between iterative testing of the response function to the prompt and mapping misfires and malfunctions onto the various parts of the prompt. Specifying the objectives of a large language agent, which requires quickly switching between user specifying response characteristics of the agent's functions and articulating putative goals or objectives whose pursuit will improve the function across many different types of users. Specifying the chain tasks of an LLA, which requires rapid alternation among ascertaining likely response patterns across many user types to first pass a system prompt and iterative modification of the objectives and tasks of the LLA. Designing an agentic architecture and workflow that replicates across a range of environments the differential response characteristics and intelligent behavior of a human agent. Specifying evaluation rubrics and metrics for eliciting measurements of the success which a large language agent was deployed. Specifying gold standard, average case, substandard response of a special purpose large language agent to an intended user's inputs, which can guide the deployment of rubrics and metrics for overall quality of response evaluations. Each of these cases highlights not only the interactive and collaborative aspect of the human-AI interface, but also the universality and accessibility of the interaction and design language that designers use to interface to LLMs via LLAs. The accessibility of the operating system via prompts and contextualizations that are free of the syntactic and semantic idiosyncrasies of programming languages democratizes access to the human-computer interface and enables the development of a wide range of skills for anyone who can take a meta-linguistic approach to the design of his or her own communicative acts. These concrete tasks may be mapped into the task-wise decomposition of metacognitive skills in order to provide a spectrogram of the skills required to design and pattern LLAs. Okay, if you fell asleep for the last 37 odd minutes, now is the time to sit up and pay attention, because these are the skills you're going to need going out in the field in 5 years. Or less than that. So self-explication, specifying the objective function, task specification, specifying the structure of tasks, decomposition, specing it apart, subtask generalization, so designing on basis of alternating shifts and, the normative, counter-normative sample responses, performance evaluation, task switching, partial credit assignment, components of blueprint, objective refinement, task specification refinement, all good stuff that you're going to need to learn, and so am I, because I'm going to be here for at least another 20 years. In addition to the metacognitive dimension of competence designing, testing, evaluating, deploying, and refining, large language agents also taps into a meta-emotional and meta-relational dimension of human capabilities. Simply put, if LLAs are to function as extensions of one working self, and if one's work is densely interactive, then the design of such agents must consider the ways of being all those humans who will in turn interact with the augmented self. Such tasks as making accurate, reliable inferences about the emotional response of the end user, of a large language agent, creating robust measures to the emotional relational connections, such as a user might feel to the agent, creating realistic instances of a prototypical user that can function as a tester or provider of test cases, testing the theory of mind capabilities of a large language agent, complex dialogical use cases, all make use of meta-relational and meta-emotional skill set that current educational systems struggle to develop given the impoverished interactional landscape of the lecture-based classroom. Okay, so infer intentionality, infer emotionality, measure emotionality, interactive reasoning, meta-linguistic, meta-relationship. So instances, make accurate, reliable inferences, design valid rubrics, design agents, okay, sorry. I am going fast on that, feel free to pause it. Far from introducing a need to simplify or dumb down the processes by which humans interact with large language models, the new learning landscape enabled by the need for large language agents and people that can pattern, create, deploy, test, and refine them reveals a new frontier of meta-human skills educational systems need to take upon themselves to help learners of all ages develop. While retreat to the comfortable truths of design and human-computer interactions for the information age is tempting, there are good arguments to resist the simplification itch in this case. The interface between humans and machines is no longer smooth and stale, but rather jagged and volatile. Sometimes the LLA designer needs to specify text as a mechanical base layer to successfully automate higher-level reasoning across a wide range of contexts. Sometimes the context of LLA use change quickly enough that all the reliability and validity guarantees of the probably approximately correct enough learning framework that undergirds all of machine learning need to be discarded. New data sets need to be curated. And in LLMs absorb and amplify the tips and tricks of successful LLA designers and users. One size will not fit all, or even most. Human cognition needs to help to rise above itself, and educators who take their role seriously need to internalize their new tasks. Alright, so interactionalism introduces an important meta-human dimension to the ontology of skills a higher education system can seek to select for and cultivate. Traditional measures of ability, such as working memory, processing speed, verbal and textual comprehension, pattern recognition, and pattern matching, alongside more recently recognized measures of social and emotional intelligence, need to be augmented by skills that specifically address the metacognitive, meta-emotional, and meta-social dimensions that working with, through, and alongside Gen AI agents require. And because of the speed with which human collaboration with human-designed AI agents is diffusing through institutional organizational environments, there's a time-sensitive need to redesign the learner selection experience and evaluation methods to adapt the new skills requirements of the labor markets. So, learner selection. And we're almost done, I swear. It is an apt and time-tested adage: we get what we select for, conditional, of course, upon the accuracy and reliability of the instruments we use for the selection. Current selection instruments for higher education, ranging from standardized tests of cognitive and technical skills to tests of written and oral comprehension to admission interviews that are carried out often by untrained, unsophisticated human evaluators, and feature one-shot answers to more or less standard questions, can and should be redesigned for the interactionalist environment. The design of the change, the direction of the change vector is provided by the metacognitive and meta-emotional dimensions, and the instruments of the change are provided by the large language agents themselves. For instance, it is now possible and desirable to move from one-shot assessment vehicles, such as multiple choice, short answer questions, calculations, piece of code, and pseudocode, and one-shot oral answer questions, to multiple-shot evaluations carried out under time, secured, and invigilated. Again, not sure that's a word, huh? So dry. Almost out of water. In which the candidate needs to answer several chain questions, challenges, and invitations to elaborate, which can test not only what the candidate knows, but what they can do with what they know in a limited number of test cases. But also how they deal with questions that probe into how they know, what the epistemological and methodological basis for their assertions are, how they would verify or falsify the validity, reliability, and generativity of various artifacts, and what the range and span of queries, applications, and extensions of a knowledge base to an unknown or unfamiliar field of knowledge might be. Large learning agents enable a redesign of the learning experience and environment of the learner that privilege specific competencies and skills we expect humans as wielders of Gen AI tools to be able to show proficiency in. One component of the redesign of the learning experience is the precise articulation of the meta-human skill set, which we have introduced a version of in previous pages, along with discipline-specific examples of use cases in which these skills are exercised. A second equally important component of the redesign of the learner's experience is the introduction of a radically dialogical approach to learning, a dialogical grammar that captures the key moments, acceptance of the scenario, personalization of the content, contextualization of assessment of the learning process. Well-designed large language agents can be used to provide an always-on feedback to learners on artifacts produced on demand, the broadcast model of learning featuring high-bandwidth downlink teacher-to-learner channel, a low-bandwidth learner-to-teacher channel comprising assignments, quizzes, and class presentations, and a very low-bandwidth feedback channel from teacher-to-learner featuring feedback on learner-produced artifacts, aka assignments, can now be effectively replaced by an always-on instruction query-answer feedback loop that massively accelerates the learning of any particular skill, and the range and situations and instances to which the learned competency is applied. And that's the one thing I am looking forward to the future. You take less time to learn stuff. That would be nice. Alright, by now it would have become clear that learner evaluation can and should also become always-on continuous process. Attuned, astute tutors can evaluate learners on the basis of questions, challenges, and other behaviors the learners produce during the learning process itself, as well as on the basis of the answers and other artifacts the learners give upon being prompted to do so by test assignments and exams. There is no distinction between online and offline behaviors, just as there is none in the workplace or a tightly connected attuned seminar setting in which every participant has a stake in the discussion. If we have, as we now do, the ability to continuously monitor and evaluate learner behaviors during the learning process, great questions and interjections, cutting and relevant challenges, and productively ampliative invitations to elaborate on a point can be as informative as assessment of learner performances on tests and quizzes. We get into the bargain a heightened level of learner attunement, agency, and participation into the instructional process itself, which this closely mimics the dynamic of the exemplary tutor-mentor relationship that is at the core of Bloom's insight, becomes guided by the learner's own questions and challenges, and personalized by the learner's own prior background, knowledge, and experiences. So interactionalism thus eats its own cooking and makes use of the very skill set it is aiming to help learners develop as a blueprint for the redesign of learner selection, experience, environment, and evaluation process. It highlights the importance of a phase shift in the construal, that is a word though, I do know construal, of LLM uses in education, from what AI can do to what we can do with AI, to specifically what we can do with AI to help learners do more with AI. So the conclusion. We have articulated the elements of an interactionalist turn and associated agenda in education, and facilitated by the broad deployment of large language agents and large language models. Key to a successful development and deployment at scale is a shift in speaking and thinking about Gen AI technologies in terms of what they can do to where we speak and do about what we can do with them through the design of large language agents that use LLMs as operating systems. We highlight the importance of meta-human skills and successful augmentation, replication, automation of human workflows and tasks using large language agents, and argue that the current emphases on reducing metacognitive workloads required for humans to interact with large language models should be construed as an opportunity for learners to develop an important and sophisticated, but nevertheless articulable and measurable skill set that will enable them to be creators and co-creators rather than users and consumers of large language agents and their outputs. So yeah, let's change education. Sounds like a good time.